So that's our setup, and now we can start writing some code. So like I was saying before, the actual implementation that we're going to do isn't so complicated. You can just follow along, just type in exactly what I'm typing, and you'll get the right solution. To do this from scratch or to like solve specific problems that you have will require you to learn a bit of the interface or the syntax of the language. And this is a little bit, it gets a little bit more complicated with Grasshopper because there's different layers of language and syntax that you need to access both the functions within Python itself and then the geometry within Grasshopper. Okay, so Python is a language just like any other programming language. It has certain functions built in, like as variables. It has ways to deal with the flow of a program, the kind of sequence in which things are executed. So that's all built into Python, and it's built into here. But in addition, to have access to Rhino geometry and all the things within Rhino and Grasshopper, that's not built into the basic Python, right? Because Python's not made just for Rhino. And the way that we get access to those features is through libraries. So basically, that's how Python's able to be incorporated in all these different softwares, is that you can build libraries to access different functions within specific pieces of software. And those are written by third parties. The technical word for that is API, it's application programming interface. Yeah. So that's a way that you can kind of make a language, allow a programming language to access particular features within specific software. Okay, so that's all the background I'm going to give you, just so you start thinking about these different layers. But if you want to dig deeper, you just have to think that there's one level where it's just Python syntax and another level where it's the Grasshopper Rhino library, which allows you to access things from this program. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is import the Rhino library into Python. And imports are pretty easy. You just type in import. And here you'll get a list of all the libraries that are currently installed. And this includes basic Python libraries, but also installed are the Rhino and Grasshopper specific libraries. You can see them here. There's Grasshopper Python, there's Grasshopper library, there's Rhino, there's Rhino script syntax, script context. Those are all different ways that you can access Rhino and Grasshopper features within Python. In this case, we're going to use Rhino script syntax. So if you go down here, you can double click it. Those pop-up menus are just to help you. You can also just type everything in. So I can just start typing import Rhino script syntax, will pop up. And then if it's highlighted here, I can just hit enter. So Rhino script syntax has access to a lot of different options and features within both Grasshopper and Rhino. And if you want, if you need a reference for all the things you can do with this, there is a documentation online. So if you go to this website, but this is basically like a help guide for Rhino script. And if you go here, you can see here's the basic package, and it's broken down by all these things. And these are all ways that you can manipulate Rhino and Grasshopper within Python. So if you want to do something with geometry, you can click here, and these are all things you can do. You can add geometry, you can test whether something's a particular piece of geometry. If you want to work with lines, there's different ways to work with lines. And then here you see material, so it's something we're going to get access to. If you click on material, you can see all the different things you can do with materials in Rhino. You can add materials to layers, you can add materials to objects, you can change material color, you can change material transparency. That's basically the way that I figured out how to do this specific application. I basically went to this documentation, I said, okay, I want to do something with materials, how do I get that accomplished? And this is what you would have to do for any application you want to figure out with Python. But the first step is knowing where to look, right? So this documentation is really useful. Okay, so once we figure out some of the functions that we might want to use, we can start implementing those within Python. Something else I'll do is this import statement will import this library so I can use it. But to use it, I'll have to type this library's name over and over to get access to its functions. So to make that easier, I'm going to add another statement here. I'm going to say import Rhino script syntax as rs. And this is kind of a shortcut, and it'll tell Python that whenever I say rs, I'm actually referring to this Rhino script syntax library. And that's just so I don't have to type all that in every time. Okay, so that's Rhino script syntax. We're going to use this library for most of our manipulations, but we need a couple other libraries to work with Rhino itself. So I'm just going to import two other libraries that will be useful for us. I'm going to type import script context. And the script context library very simply tells Python which context to work with. And there's two options. There's either Grasshopper or Rhino. So it's actually, we can use functions to access the Rhino document and the Grasshopper document. Okay, so this script context will allow us to switch between the two. So we can get stuff from Grasshopper, and then we can put stuff in Rhino, and then we can work with that stuff in Rhino. And this library will allow us to switch between those contexts. And then the final library we need is just the basic Rhino library. And this will let us access geometry and viewport information, all this other stuff within Rhino. Okay, so that's all the imports we need. So now we can start building our code. Basically, any of these languages are procedural. So once you start writing operations, they get executed in order, one by one. But like any scripting languages, you have control over the order of things or what gets executed. So the first piece we're going to write is called a conditional, and it's going to specify whether the code gets executed based on some condition. And you remember we used this active Boolean to trigger whether the code will execute. So the first basic thing we can do is say if active, colon. And then if you hit enter after that, you see that now it's indented, and everything within this indent is now part of this subgroup, and those things will only get executed if this statement is true. So an if is a very basic condition statement, and active is our Boolean, okay? And this active, once we type this, and if it matches exactly what's written here, it'll actually inherit that Boolean from our input. Okay, so say if active, and then just to show you how this works, I'm gonna do something very simple, and I'm just gonna print a basic statement. I'm gonna say hello world, and go to test. All right, so by default, our active is set to false, so nothing will happen. Basically, it's gonna go to this if active, that's false, so it's not gonna do anything here. And so we can see what's going on. We can make a panel connected to out. So this output will give us the results of this script, basically whatever's in this window. Now if we toggle that to true, you can see that we have our print statement. Okay, so it's a very basic conditional. And in this particular case, we want this active to basically turn the functions on or off. We're going to type all of our code within this condition. So if this is false, nothing will happen. If it's true, all of these things will start to get executed. So that's a conditional. Basically, it will control whether certain code gets executed and not within the script.